Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris, and I am an alcoholic. It's really good to be here, Ron. Thanks for spearheading this whole thing. It's such a pleasure to do these things with my friend Chris. You know, this is what I believe happened. This is a theory that I have, and you look back at the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. You look back to the early days, and what AA was a program of recovery and a support fellowship built up around the taking of these spiritual exercises, these steps. And AA really started to grow, and the fellowship really started to grow. And somewhere along the line, it became it became a fellowship of sobriety with a support program that you could engage in or not engage in. And it became absolutely fine to languish in the back row, not being held accountable to working the steps. And in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, if you weren't willing to take the spiritual action, they figured you didn't have a desire to stop drinking. So, Alcoholics Anonymous, for good or for bad, opened up the doors incredibly wide to let absolutely everybody in. But I describe it as a renaissance. And it started with some people in Texas. It started with some people in Colorado. And what it was a renewed adherence to the instructions and the information in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And people started to open that book up again with a determination to consider it the guiding factor of recovery. And I've got to tell you, there's no one that's been more influential in the world today getting back to that than Chris. Chris has been tireless over the last 20 some years. And, we all really owe him a debt of gratitude for doing that. Now, just quickly for me to qualify, so that I'm speaking from experience. I just want to briefly tell you what my first step truth is. Chris did a great job of describing it. My first step truth is this: from almost the beginning, it was very rare that when I started drinking alcohol, I didn't continue drinking alcohol. But it got worse over the years. And toward the last 5 years of my drinking or so, I knew that when I had a drink, clear my schedule, because I'm going in, I don't need any appointments. I don't need, you coming over and asking me to help you with your car or any of that crap. When I started drinking, I was going all in. And it was almost an unconscious thing for me. And it got to the point where I became very, very isolated because of that. I needed to be in a safe space to do my drinking. I know there's a lot of bar drinkers, and all of our experiences are different. We need to be asking ourselves the same questions, but our experiences are different. But what happened with me was I became very, very protective of my drinking. And if you got in my way, or you brought it to my attention, or you interrupted it or interfered with it, you were out. So my world got smaller and smaller and smaller. And I ended up the last 4 years or so of my drinking in a room in my mother's house, upstairs, by myself. And it was a very lonely, dark, decadent kind of existence. But that's where alcoholism brought me. So when I picked up a drink, that drink would ask for the second drink. The second drink would insist on the third would demand the fourth. The more alcohol in my body, the more my body wanted alcohol. Now that separates me from non-alcoholics, I would pass out. I would be sitting in my chair at my desk and I'd pass out and I'd hit the floor. And when I came to, I would get up and there would be a ginormous, because I drank out of these like 30-ounce glasses, there would be a giant bourbon and Coke that I just poured. Like I just poured it 2 seconds before I passed out. Now, what is that? That's the allergy. That's the craving. And then that's my truth. That's how it manifested in me. But the tricky thing with me, the thing that I didn't get for years and years and years was the obsession of the mind. Here's a typical day in my life. I'd come to wearing the clothes I passed out in the night before, and I'd stagger up, because I got to go to work. And I'd stagger into the bathroom and my hair would be sticking straight up. And I'd throw some water on my face. I'd do a couple of vomiting calisthenics, and I'd stagger out to my $100 car and go off to my terrible job. And I've got to tell you, that whole time I am shattered, because we lie to ourselves a lot of times when I've got a hangover. Well, no, what I had was alcohol poisoning. I put enough alcohol in my body that my body was poisoned by it. And I'm suffering from those effects because I was like 130 pounds soaking wet, and I would drink at least a fifth, sometimes a quart of hard liquor on a work night, So I'd be driving to work and I'd be swearing to God, today's the day. I never want to feel like this again. And if you would have wrapped a lie detector around my wrist and asked me, Chris, are you going to quit drinking today? I'd say, yes, today is the day. I meant it with everything I had. The polygraph guy'd go, you can put money on this guy. This guy's going to quit drinking today. He's, this machine is saying he's telling the truth, because I meant it. I'd get a sandwich down around lunchtime. I'd rehydrate with like a half a gallon of something. And around 2 o'clock, I get off at 4, around 2 o'clock, I'm starting to think to myself, that decision that you made early today, that's kind of a strong decision. That might even be an overreaction, and so it'd be 4 o'clock, and I would have modified that decision a little bit to enable me to drive right to the liquor store and get another quart of vodka. Now, here's the lie I told myself for years and years and years. The lie I told myself was, I changed my mind. Now, here's the thing. What I didn't get was, I didn't have a mind to change. How much power is powerless? It's not a lot. And when it's right up there with damn near none, So until I was exposed to the literature in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't understand what was going on. And when I showed up in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was working in AA, whatever, based on not drinking. I got to figure this not drinking thing out, because I know I need to separate from alcohol, because it was killing me. And even worse than that, I was becoming really, really violent in these blackouts. And, I'm not a violent person by nature. I do not wish to harm people. I'm very sensitive about that. And so I'm being turned into this psychopath in these blackouts. Now, and so I show up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is what I think AA is going to be. It's going to be like a giant pep rally. And we're going to go to meetings, and we're going to, yay, we don't drink today. And we're going to first things first, and we're going to upside down think 3 times. And we're all going to huddle up and hold hands like you would in a football huddle. And, okay, we're going to see you at the Looney Nooney tomorrow break, And that's going to create the enthusiasm in me to remember not to drink. That's what I thought AA was. I really did. We got to keep our memory green. We got to keep it simple and all these one-liners. The problem is I'm in real trouble. The problem is that I'm what you would describe in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, as a real alcoholic. So I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm almost 90 days sober. And I'm driving to an AA meeting. And listen, if there was a meter as you walked into these meetings, and the meter was how much do you not want to drink meter, I'd have beat anybody in that meeting. I didn't want to drink more than anybody in that meeting. I could guarantee you, because I'm fresh off the battlefield. Now, what happens is I'm driving to this meeting, and the thought crosses my mind that it's been a while since I've been drunk. And, this AA thing, I'm showing up and everything, but there seems like there's people that are more enthusiastic about the whole thing than me. And you know what? I'll bet if I buy a gallon of vodka and drink it, it's going to do two things. It's going to remind me what it's like to be drunk, and I'm going to fly back in AA, with a renewed enthusiasm. This is going to make me Mr. AA. So I drank a gallon of vodka to improve my sobriety. Now, listen, I'm grateful that this happened because sometimes we have to, the truth has to be smashed home on us sometimes about what the obsession of the mind is, about just how much trouble we're really in. And I learned from that alcohol doesn't care if we don't want to drink it. Alcohol doesn't care what kind of things are going to happen if we drink it again. If she's going to leave, or if we're going to lose the job or whatever, go back to prison. Alcohol doesn't care about all that stuff. If you're powerless over it, you're powerless over it. So what happened in my case was I came out of this terrifically brutal, 7-month relapse, and I staggered back into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've got to tell you, I came in on New Year's Eve. I showed back up in 1989, and I was absolutely desperate. I'm going to try this Alcoholics Anonymous thing again. Now, here's another thing that kills people like us. I went back to AA, not really thinking it was going to work for me, but just taking that chance, taking that shot, because I'd been in AA. No one had qualified me. No one had explained, the program of recovery to me. But I'd been in AA, so it would have been very, very easy for me to say, I went to AA for a while. It didn't work for me. But for some reason, deep down inside, I felt like there might be a possibility that I can survive this alcoholism thing, and my best shot is to go back to AA. And I went back to AA, and this time I did the things that I believed were stupid and would not work. So, get a sponsor. Well, that's kind of stupid. Why would I want to do that? I'd call somebody up, hey, well, this is what I did today. What do you think? And do a 90 and 90, they told me to do. So here's the funny thing. I went to a meeting every night for my first 8 years. But they said do a 99. All right. Join a home group. Oh, that's stupid. Why would you join? I go to meetings. Like, why do I have to join a home group? I'm already going to meet. So all the things that I didn't think were important, didn't think would work, and thought were stupid, I was willing to do. And I truly think today that was the grace of God, because I'm the type of person who doesn't join who I'm sarcastic, I'm judgmental. I never finish anything. I took guitar lessons one time. I took like 2 lessons and stole a guitar and never went back. I joined the Boy Scouts. I went on one camp out, never went back. I went down to Florida to college and spent 3.5 years getting 6 credits. I mean, I never, I did, if I just didn't want to deal. I had a real lack of dealage. And I show up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and for some reason or another, I stuck. And I truly believe that that's the grace of God today. So I get exposed to some people. I'm rattling around AA. You got to understand, I'm a bad alcoholic, and I think the fellowship was able to create, for a period of time, it was able to create an environment where I could stay sober, because I was going to so many meetings, and I did get a sponsor, and I was saying yes, and I was a treasurer over here, and I was a secretary over there, and I was just taking people out to the diner after. I was really busy with fellowship stuff, and I believe that created an environment for a period of time where I could stay sober until I was exposed to some people who had working experience with the 12 steps. Now, unlike Chris, it wasn't a couple of old timers in my group. It was a set of tapes. It would have been really unusual in the late 80s, early 90s, in the AA area that I was in, for someone to say, I'll be your sponsor and come over my house and we'll open the big book and we'll start working this stuff. Unheard of in my area at that point in time. So what happened was, a friend of mine, Radio Shack Mike, hands me 8 90-minute tapes, and I go, "What are these?" And he goes, "Oh, you're a hardcore dude. I didn't really care for him, but you'll probably like him." He was a guy that got arrested with a gram of cocaine, and was in AA like for the next 8 years, never really drank. So he didn't respond to these tapes, but he thought that I would. So he gives me these tapes, and I go, "Big book? You mean the book they give you in treatment?" I mean, that was the exposure I had to the big book. They handed it to you the first day of treatment when you were completely psychotic, and that was it. I did get people to sign it, though. You know how you have people sign your big book, after treatment, and so when I started to get involved in going through the book and following the instructions, I opened up the book for the first time in a long time, and I saw all the signatures, and there was one in there: "Chris, you crazy bastard, you're never going to make it. Love, Harry." It's all these from treatment. Now what happened is he handed me these tapes, and I did the math. Okay, 8 90-minute tapes. That's 12 hours. I go, "Well, who's doing the workshop?" He goes, "A couple of guys from Arkansas." I go, "Arkansas?" I'm thinking 12 hours. The book Alcoholics Anonymous, 12. From Arkansas. But the guy goes, "No, trust me, you'll like it. Promise me you'll listen to him." And I did. And here's the thing. What Joe and Charlie said to me, what I heard, because I was sensitive, what I heard was, "Chris, you're fellowshipping like a maniac. You're all over the fellowship. But if you're not taking the instructions from the book Alcoholics Anonymous, you do not have an AA program." Because that's what an AA program is. So when you drink, please don't go out and spread any rumors that Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work, because you never worked it. Now, when I heard this, I was upset with it, because it really bothered me, because people are patting me on the head because I'm in a million meetings. I'm saying yes, I'm chairing this and running around there. And what these guys from Arkansas said was, "I don't have a clue. And neither does anybody else in your meetings, and neither does your sponsor." And this was really difficult for me to internalize. My first reaction was, well, maybe that's how they do it in Arkansas. But in New Jersey, we share, I, I mean, I was upset. So, so here's what happened. Here's what happened to me. Um, I met a young lady in AA. You know how that is. Oh, you should have seen my sponsor's face when I shared with him. He's like, "No, oh, my phone will never stop." I thought he'd be happy for me, and I learned very, very quickly: two ding-a-lings don't make a bell. Um, that relationship exploded like the Hindenburg going down. Now, I also got laid off of my job. This is all like in a 1 week period. I also got laid off my job, and that was kind of rough. And then I started to get letters from Florida with, you open it up and it says something about fleeing to avoid prosecution. Florida got too much for me, so I just kind of said, "Yeah, see you later, Florida." Got court dates and community service, all this stuff. I just left, and all this hit me at once. Now, there's a line in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, that basically says there are going to be trials, there are going to be low spots ahead. If your spiritual house is not in order, if you're not applying enough spiritual principles in your life, you're not going to be able to get through that period of time. So really, what happened with me was I got to such an emotional state. It describes it in our book as pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And understand that we alcoholics are very, very sensitive people. So, I believe that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization is very, very dangerous for us. The experience of suicide with alcoholics is off the charts, because we get to that place where we cannot imagine life the way it is. We cannot imagine a life of recovery. We can't imagine not ever having alcohol. And it just looks like we're closed in and there's no way to go. And I'm right there. And I remember going over to my sponsor's house and I couldn't even talk. I was so emotionally upset that I knocked on the door. I never did that. He opens the door, "Chris?" And I was like, I couldn't even tell you, just come on in, we'll make some coffee. Now what he offered me was good fellowship stuff, go to a meeting. I mean, good, strong fellowship stuff. And like Chris was saying, these people, nobody's out there trying to hurt us. They're giving us the best they got. But I walked out of his house still completely demoralized. And this is another area where I believe the grace of God entered my life. I was at a crossroads. I could take my own life and end this thing pretty quick. I could go to the liquor store and, for 2 hours escape the emotional pain of this stuff. I could literally go crazy. But what I decided to do was, the message that Joe and Charlie had shared haunted me. Sometimes the truth haunts you. And it says in one of the chapters of the book, if you've disturbed someone about their alcoholism, this is all to the good. And Joe and Charlie had disturbed me. They basically told me I was not doing my job. And it was a very, very risky place to be. So what I did was I blew the dust off of this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a cassette player right over here. I got a notebook and a pen and my big book. And I started to go through the Joe and Charlie tapes, taking myself through the 12 steps. Now, I don't recommend that. You'd be much better off finding someone with deep working experience with the steps and placing yourselves unreservedly, under their direction. But I didn't have an option like that. I didn't know of an option like that. So what I did was I started to go through these steps. Now, I want to talk a little bit about step 2. You have to talk about some of our history really to understand the depth and the weight of step 2. Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob are both end stage alcoholics, right? And for one reason or another, they both end up in the Oxford group. Bob ends up in the Oxford group out in Akron, and Bill ends up in the Oxford group in New York. Now, people had been getting sober in the Oxford group. People had been getting sober in the Emmanuel movement. People had been getting sober in the Salvation Army. People had been getting sober in a lot of different places. When they applied specific spiritual principles and operated outside of their selfishness and their self-centeredness and tried to give back a little bit, there were people who had periods of sobriety. So there were some sober people in the Oxford group. Now, what happened was Dr. Bob was a lot like I was early on. He came late, he left early, and he didn't really want to get involved. Anybody sponsor in here? Does that sound familiar? Now, unfortunately, Dr. Bob was not able to get and to stay sober. He kept going because he was, like a lot of us will keep going to AA. We keep, there's some kind of hope there, but he wasn't taking any action. So he wasn't getting any results. Now, 1,000 miles away in New York, Bill Wilson gets involved with the Oxford group, but he's got nothing better to do than to come early and to stay late and to get involved. And if they would tell him to go get on a soapbox on Fifth Avenue and witness, he would do that. And he got sober. He started to put some real time together. And internally, he felt like there was really some change happening. So that's really one of the first lessons, I think, that Alcoholics Anonymous teaches us in our history. It's not the people that want it. It really isn't. It's the people that do it. So being powerless over alcohol, the solution to that would need to be power. If I'm powerless over alcohol, if I don't find some type of power, I'm going to continue to drink. The obsession of the mind's going to continue to take me out. I need to find something very, very significant that's going to keep me separated from, safe and protected from alcohol. What the early AAs found was by applying these spiritual principles that they learned in the Oxford group, if they actually did them, what would happen is they would gain access to a power that would keep them safe and protected. And they called this power God. That was a religious organization. People were, Christian proponents and all that. So they had a particular perspective about what they called this power. Bill Wilson later on really opened that up and expanded that concept of power. And if you pay attention to some of the terminology in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, it's very progressive, very broad, roomy, and all-inclusive descriptions of what God is. A power greater than ourselves. The great director, the great reality, the Father of light. You start to see a very inclusive vision of this power. And I think that was very, very wise early on, and not to keep it religious or within a certain parameter, to really enable all of us to be able to develop our own personal connection to and relationship with this power. So in step 2, I have to start to come to believe that there's a power greater than myself that's going to restore me to sanity. What kind of sanity? Well, don't you think it's insane to swear off alcohol in the morning and be at the liquor store that afternoon? That's pretty damn insane. There's a lot of other things that I could pack in there, but that's the main insanity that I need to be restored from. So so in step 2, I need to start to come to believe. I need to start to lay aside my prejudice. I have to start to become open-minded on these spiritual concepts and this spiritual direction. Now, Bill understood when the big book was being put together that this is going to be difficult for us. You know, we're gonna need to go on the way we've been going on, blotting out the intolerable situation as best we can, you know, until the bitter end, or accept spiritual help. And we're like, what's that bitter end look like? You know, again, I need some more information on that bitter end, you know, before I make it. So he knows it's very, very difficult for us to accept the spiritual help because we've been so damaged by alcoholism. Now, in step 3, there's a body of work between page 60 and like 63 that is so important. Every year, those pages have become more meaningful to me and more important for me to look at. Because in those pages, it describes how I have separated myself from you, how I've separated myself from God, and how I've placed myself in a position to be all by myself with alcohol. And it talks about how selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of really what the problem is. It's funny, it doesn't say bourbon is the root of your problems. Let's remove bourbon and everything is going to be fine. The early AAs understood that abstinence was not a treatment for alcoholism. They tried it time and time again. Not drinking one day at a time was not an answer to alcoholism. They tried it over and over again. There's a bigger problem, and there's a solution that needs to be applied. And they start by asking us to look at our selfishness and our self-centeredness. Now, it also says sometimes we're so selfish we don't even think we're selfish. That's selfish, you know? Listen, folks. I go to a Monday night beginners meeting over in New Jersey, and it's a great meeting. I love this meeting. There's 120 people there, and 70 of them are under 90 days, and it's beautiful. The format of the meeting is to have everyone under 90 days share, and then the remainder of the meeting is people with experience, you know, strength, and hope to kind of share on top of all that stuff. And the first part of the meeting is beautiful because it's an assault of selfishness and self-centeredness. Your hair blows back. It's like share. It's you know, it's like unbelievable. It brings me back to, you know, what my real problem is. I am that, you know. I've got to work my ass off spiritually to become you know, different than the person that just exhibits this toxic selfishness and self-centeredness. And if you go up to them and you say, dude, you're about the most selfish and self-centered person I've ever seen in my life, they will not get it, because that's how they've been living, you know. But I look, you know, I look back on my life, and that's real. The book says self had defeated us. Think about that. Self had defeated us. You know, that's a very, very progressive, you know, enlightened, Zen-esque kind of a way to look at this stuff. But it's absolutely true. You know, we have met the enemy, and the enemy is us. And our problems are not coming at us, they're coming from us. And let's look at how we're the actor that wants to run the whole show. I'll give you a couple of examples of this. I've signed myself into 28-day treatment, right? I'm in there, and I'm looking around, and the food's not really up to par. You only have certain times where you can smoke, and you got to make your bed and all this stuff that I'm really not okay with. So I organize the other guys in treatment, and we're gonna stick together, and we're gonna go and we're gonna demand reform, right? And literally, I like organize all these treatment people, and we march down to the nurses' station with our demands, and they just laugh at us. I got hospital plastic on. I'm gonna tell the hospital how to run the place. You know, unbelievable, unbelievable. If I got involved with you romantically, I was not a vision for you, ladies, to be like involved with, because it was a hostage situation. Normally, what would happen is you'd make the enormous error of becoming attracted to me and letting me know, and then it's just all over, because I've got to run everything. I got to know where you are, and this and I, who were you talking to, and I turn into that guy, and my whole world is shot through with these manifestations of self, and was it self that defeated me? You're absolutely right. So here's the brilliance of the 12 steps. They're designed to go after that self, that manifestation of self. They're not designed to teach us just to keep our memory green and not take the first drink no matter what, even if our ass falls off. That's not it, right? The 12 steps are spiritually designed to take this toxic, overwhelming experience of self and bring it back in line. And in the third step, I really have to look at this. I really have to look at this selfishness before I make a decision. The third step prayer is what I would describe as an affirmation prayer. What an affirmation prayer is you've already come to the conclusion. You've already decided on, and your prayer is acknowledging that. So it's an affirmation prayer. So when I say the third step prayer, I need to, at a very, very deep level, understand just how much trouble I'm in with this selfishness. Now, there was a great speaker. I had an opportunity. I found this tape somewhere, and there was this wonderful speaker out of California. His name was Chuck C. And why this guy was cool was, up until the point Chuck shows up on the scene, most of the speaker meetings were drunkalogs. Like, yeah, I drank. And there'd be a little bit of, I got sober, and my life is good. But for the most part, when you went to a speaker meeting, you would hear somebody's story. He kind of flipped the script a little bit, and I think he decided, yeah, I'm going to do spiritual talks, and people really responded to these talks. And in 1945, he did a talk that was fully cut cloth. I could not believe how good this talk was. It was the first talk that had ever been recorded of this guy. So, there are some enlightened people out there, I think, as far as, what the problem is and what the solution is. But he did something in one of his workshops that I found incredibly profound. And it was this. He had a whiteboard. So I'm not going to scratch over issue man. I really don't want to do that. That would be disrespectful. But just pretend for a minute. He would draw a giant circle, okay, big, huge circle. And then he would say, Okay, inside that circle is the entire universe, all the people, all the planets, all the galaxies, everything that exists is within this circle. And then he would draw a little dot right outside the circle and say, that's you. And isn't it, isn't it? I had become so separated from everyone and everything. I had become so alone because of the toxic expression of this selfishness that I felt outside the circle. I believe the steps are designed to bring us back into that circle, to put us back in unity, to put us back in connection with God, to our fellow man, to ourselves. Now, this is an overgeneralization, and it's mostly accurate. But think about the steps this way. Step 1, me. Step 2, God. Step 3, you. Steps 4 and 5, me. 6 and 7, God. 8 and 9, you. Step 10, me. Step 11, God. Step 12, you. Think about that. We have got to be brought back into communion with and connection with God and our fellow man. And that's what the steps ultimately do. What happens when the steps ultimately do that? This toxic expression of selfishness and self-centeredness gets reduced. Our character defects get removed. Hopefully we get to some kind of humility and we start to become disciplined with the practice of these steps and develop a compassion and a service ethic. Hopefully all of that happens. And I believe I drank. One of the reasons I drank, the main reason is I'm an alcoholic, but another reason that I was drawn into it was life lived along these selfish and self-centered path that I was on had become so incredibly painful to live that I would grab alcohol. I would grab drugs. I needed to find something out there to put in to this gaping spiritual vacancy that was within myself. And I was looking for all these other things for many, many years to make me feel better about myself. What are the steps designed to do? They're designed to fill that spiritual vacancy in a holistic way, a very spiritual and healthy way. Now, also involved with step 3, if you're being sponsored by me, before we're done with step 3, I want to be convinced that you've made a decision to go through the rest of the steps with me. You absolutely, before I let you start to write inventory, I want to be sure you understand this selfishness and how it's manifesting and how it's defeating you. I want you to understand that there is a power. There's a power many of us have experienced. This power will work in you and through you and bring about revolutionary changes within your thinking, your action, your attitude. And you need to be willing to take these steps. Now, here's a funny thing. I'll get asked to be sponsored by, say, 10 people. Something like 3 or 4 of them will finish their amends. You know, what happens? What happens? I believe that alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful. I believe the manifestations of self are cunning, baffling, and powerful. And a lot of times we get to a place where we will accept relief and not continue to fight for freedom. We'll be okay with relief, you know. That's part of the nature of alcoholism. It's one of the aspects of alcoholism. For us, we've got a self-defeating default setting. What helps? What helps are really strong groups, really good sponsorship. That's probably the big thing. Really good sponsorship, really strong groups. Um, I'm like Chris. I believe that there's a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous that are not what could be defined as a powerless, hopeless, real alcoholic. And I'm fine with that. Look, if it'll keep you from drinking and driving and smashing into my family, come on in. You know what I mean? But what we have to understand is we need to know what our own truth is, and we need to attach that truth to a program of action, and we need to be about that business. You know what happened? What happened with me is I don't know why I became willing to pull down the Joe and Charlie tapes, the big book, and all this stuff. I believe that there is a grace of God that permeates us, and I think we can become attuned to that grace. I'm going to finish by reading a couple of my favorite paragraphs from Alcoholics Anonymous literature. And believe it or not, both of these are from the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. All right, the third paragraph in the foreword to the 12 and 12 says this: AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. So the steps, they're a group of principles, spiritual in their nature. If we practice these steps as a way of life, they place us in a position of neutrality, safe and protected against putting alcohol back in our body. And the brass ring is enable us to become happily and usefully whole. I always wanted to be happily and usefully whole. I thought halfway down a bottle of vodka was happily and usefully whole, because I'd take a couple of drinks and my reaction would usually be like this: everything's going to be good now. Everything's going to be good now. And then I would become a vomiting pig. But I always wanted to be happily and usefully whole. So that's a byproduct of this spiritual way of life. So that's the good news. I want to share, because I think everybody here is adult enough to hear this. I want to share the bad news. And they hid this on page 174 in Tradition 9. They didn't want us to read this too soon. It says this: unless each AA member follows to the best of their ability our suggested 12 steps to recovery, they almost certainly sign their own death warrant. Do you think they mean death warrant? Well, it says earlier in this book that we get a daily reprieve based on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. You know what a reprieve is? One of the definitions. It's a stay of execution. Is what a reprieve is. We get a stay of execution. So what if this is true? What if this is true? What if we don't embrace these 12 steps as an operational methodology, a way of life, we're signing our own death warrant? What if that's true? I would say that if you've gone down the scale to the point where you can qualify as a real alcoholic in this book, I believe it's true, because I see it. It's born out of my experience. I have buried so many people, One of the worst things is with alcoholism, it takes us a long time to die. And every single day that goes by, the quality of life just gets worse for us as we're on the way out. And we usually go out pitied or resented. And then it says, their drunkenness and disillusion are not penalties inflicted by people in authority. They result from their personal disobedience to spiritual principles. Why do we drink again, folks? Is it possible it's because of our personal disobedience to spiritual principles? Don't you know deep down inside that's true? That we have to come in here and we have to make the best attempt we can make? We have to make the best attempt we can make. And with that, I think I'm done. Thanks.